case you're about to see is fictional, but the jury is made up of members of the public who will assess the evidence and deliver their own verdict at the end of the program.
And Nicholson, please. Come this way.
At 10:15 on the night of April the 28th, 18-year-old Benjamin Merton committed suicide by jumping off a footbridge at Fulchester South Station in front of a goods train. He'd spent the previous weekend at a 48-hour marathon encounter group. Prosecution alleged that the boy was a latent psychotic, that Michael Lucas, the clinical psychologist who led the group, was grossly negligent in exposing him to this intensive experience, and that this mistreatment was the direct cause of Benjamin's subsequent suicide. Lucas is on trial for manslaughter. Miss Anne Nicholson, a fellow participant in the weekend marathon group, is in the witness box.
Yes, there were 12 of us in the group.
Yes, now, Miss Nicholson, would you please explain to the court what is a marathon encounter group?
Well, my lord, Michael Lucas describes it in his pamphlets as a continuous residential experience taking place in a private, secluded setting, lasting 48 hours with only one short break for sleep.
And did you regard this marathon as some kind of psychiatric treatment?
Oh, no, my lord, it's really nothing to do with orthodox psychiatry. It's supposed to be a kind of workshop for group interaction and personality development. You all talk about your problems and do various kinds of exercises.
Personality development. Yes, yes, Mr. Parson.
Now, Miss Nicholson, will you tell the jury what happened to Benjamin Merton on the morning of Sunday, April 27th?
He had a psychotic breakdown.
Oh, my lord, Miss Nicholson is not qualified to apply technical terms to any incident she may have witnessed.
Oh, yes, I think that's right, Mr. Honeycomb. Perhaps you would just describe what you saw.
I saw a boy in an absolutely uncontrollable state. He was laughing, crying, talking gibberish. At one point, he was obviously hallucinating.
How do you mean hallucinating?
Well, he thought his mother was in the room. He was screaming at her.
Yes. Had he been behaving in an excitable manner before this occurred?
Oh, no, quite the reverse. He'd been extremely quiet since the group commenced at 9 o'clock on Friday night. He'd hardly spoken. We didn't have a break for sleep for the first 26 hours, and then we started again the next morning at 6.
Yes. How did you start the next morning?
I was the one in the hot seat, as it's called.
The hot seat?
Yes, my lord. One person talks about how they're feeling about themselves and about the others in the group, and then the group come back with their reactions and feelings about that person.
Sort of truth game, is it?
I suppose you could call it that, my lord.
Well, please go on.
Well, I'd been trying to articulate some particularly complicated and painful feelings of mine when Benjamin suddenly interrupted me and said something very aggressive.
Yes, what was that?
He said, she just likes listening to the sound of her own bloody voice. Well, I wasn't in the least offended. I was interested, actually, but before I could ask him what he meant, Michael Lucas said, don't talk about her, talk to her. Tell her what you're feeling about her. And then Benjamin began a wild verbal attack on me. As a matter of fact, he turned the whole group against me.
Yes, and the accused, what did he do?
He just kept telling him to go on. I could see the boy was in a very unbalanced state. He just got more and more wild. He began making gibberish noises and crouching, moving about in a funny, erratic way. He should have been calmed down.
But was not?
No. After a while, he suddenly began to cry. I went over to him, actually, and I put my arms around him and tried to quieten him. He was in dreadful distress. But Michael Lucas called to me to leave him alone, and when I refused, he took me by the arm and led me back to my seat. Well, after that, I really wanted no more part of it. I went into a corner of the room and tried to read a book.
Yes, and Benjamin?
Well, he just went entirely to pieces. He was in a thoroughly dangerous state, but Michael Lucas kept urging him to go on. Eventually, they tried to roll and rock him, but it was really too late.
Roll and rock him?
Oh, yes, it's an exercise, my lord. You form a close circle and you put the person in the centre and then roll him from one to another. And then you lift him off the ground and rock him to and fro. It's supposed to make the person relaxed and trusting, but he was really much too far gone. He just lay on the floor, whimpering like a baby. It was really most painful.
Yes. And after that?
Well, I left the room. I said I was going to the bathroom, but actually I was so shocked and repelled by what had happened that I went to my car and I drove home.
Yes. Now, Miss Nicholson, you have participated in group encounter work before, I believe.
Yes, I was in an ongoing group led by Michael Lucas that met once a week for the last 4 months of last year.
Yes. And had you ever come across a similar incident in your group workshops?
Never. If I had thought that anything like that could happen, I would never have signed up for the marathon.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Nicholson.
And Miss Nicholson, as I understand it, there is a rule that all members of a marathon encounter weekend make a definite commitment not to leave the group until the formal closure of the meeting. Yes?
Yes, that is true. However, I felt that my commitment had been invalidated. This may sound a little pretentious, but for moral reasons. A young boy had been precipitated into an extremely dangerous condition, as anyone could have seen.
Yes, but except for you, no one did. Now, had Mr. Lucas been as keenly aware of the danger as you claim to have been, what should he have done?
Got proper psychiatric help for the boy.
Well, tell me, Miss Nicholson, did it occur to you, as a result of what you say you witnessed and have described to us, to seek qualified help for the boy before you left the house that Sunday?
Well, there wasn't anything I could do.
Oh, well, surely you could have telephoned for an ambulance, couldn't you? Or even the police, if you really had witnessed a dangerous situation.
I didn't really think of it in those terms.
What, because at the time you didn't think that the situation required such drastic remedies?
No.
No. Miss Nicholson, you had not previously regarded my client as an irresponsible person, had you?
Anything he may have told you about my feelings for him, Well, I was in a very emotional state during that period.
Now, Miss Nicholson, my client has given me no instructions at all about any feelings you may have had for him. Those feelings are not our concern. However, you found your own experience in this group disappointing and frustrating.
Yes, I was thoroughly disillusioned.
Yes, and you don't deny that you felt anger towards my client.
Because of the way he treated that boy.
Well, the fact is, Miss Nicholson, isn't it, that the anger you felt when you left the house that day was a purely personal resentment, and it has strongly coloured your evidence in this court, hasn't it?
No.
Miss Nicholson, the very alarming breakdown that Benjamin Merton had the day before his death, what was the duration of that breakdown?
I should say it was at least an hour, perhaps more.
Yes, and throughout this period, did the accused do anything to alleviate Benjamin Merton's terrible distress?
On the contrary. He did everything he could to exacerbate it.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Nicholson. I have no further questions, madam.
Well, thank you, Miss Nicholson.
I call Mrs. Sylvia Merton. You are Mrs. Sylvia Merton of 63 Melville Road, Fulchester.
Yes, I am.
And you are the mother of the deceased Benjamin Derrick Merton.
Yes.
And I believe you're widowed, Mrs. Merton.
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Merton, I know this is going to be extremely painful for you, but I must ask you about your son's behavior on the night he died. Now, when did you first see him on that Monday, 28th of April?
At about 9 o'clock in the evening. I'd been away for a week in Wolverhampton, taking care of my sister, who was very ill, and I arrived back in Fulchester at about 7:30 that evening.
But you didn't see your son until 9?
No. I was very surprised when he wasn't at the station to meet me. And he wasn't at home. I telephoned Mr. Field. He was my son's old headmaster, and he was supposed to be staying there. Well, Mr. Field told me he hadn't stayed there at all. He'd asked for our key, and he'd spent the whole week at home. Well, I was very upset by this.
Why did that worry you so much, Mrs. Merton?
Well, I couldn't understand why the plans had been changed, my lord. My son was very young for his age. He couldn't possibly have looked after himself.
I see, yes.
But your son came in at 9 o'clock.
Yes. He suddenly burst into the house. He looked dreadful. Dreadful.
In what way?
Was so untidy. You'd never seen my boy untidy. His clothes every which way, and mud all over his shoes, and he was exhausted, you could tell. his face, he was so pale and perspiration all over his face and his hair soaked in it. And he started talking the moment he came through the door, not a word of apology about not meeting my train.
What was he talking about?
I couldn't make it out. This thing he called a marathon. A whole weekend with strangers in the house of a person I didn't even know, this Lucas. Complete strangers. Playing games with them, he said, and telling each other things. All kinds of private things. And sleeping in the same room, on cushions, men and women together. It all came out at once. I kept asking him to slow down and tell me properly, but he just rushed on, pell-mell. I cracked up, Mother, he said. I really cracked up.
What did he mean by that? Did he say?
Oh, I couldn't get him to explain. I begged of him to tell me exactly what happened, but he just kept saying it wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough, again and again. And he couldn't keep still. He'd sit down for a minute and then jumping up and laughing one minute and nearly crying the next. It was terrible.
Yes. And how long did this go on for, Mrs. Merton?
Oh, about half an hour. He wouldn't let me get a word in, and finally I got so upset that I went into the hall to telephone our doctor, but he ran round and he blocked my way.
Yes, was his behaviour totally untypical? Had you seen him exhibit such behaviour before?
No. As I say, he was a stranger to me that night. He wasn't my son.
Yes, and you felt he needed to see a doctor.
Well, yes, it seemed to me he must be ill.
Yes, but he refused to let you call the doctor.
Yes. He just stood there talking, the words pouring out of him. I couldn't bear to let him go on, and I took hold of him by the shoulders and I shook him. I had to shout to make him listen to me. I can't remember what I said, but I was just trying to get him to come to his senses.
Yes, did you succeed?
Well, not really, no. He went quiet, but he was miles away. He stared at me for a minute, but he wasn't really seeing me, I could tell. And then he wrenched himself out of my hands, and before I knew what was happening, he'd run straight out of the house, and he left the front door open. And the wind was blowing in.
Yes, did you go after him?
Yes. Yes, I ran down the front steps and I could see him running down the road. He was too far away for me to call out, and I didn't. Well, I couldn't. Not shouting in the street. And I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And I just came back into the house, and I waited for him to come back.
Which, of course, he never did.
The police said there'd been an accident. They took me to the hospital. They wanted me to identify the body.
Mr. Parsons, the verdict at the inquest was suicide while the balance of the mind was disturbed.
Yes, my lord, that is
Oh, yes,
correct.
yes, but he didn't know. He didn't know what he was doing. No, he jumped off the bridge and the train.
Yes, I'm sorry to have to distress you in this way, Mrs. Merton, but I'm afraid I must ask you these questions. Now, your son had made a previous suicide attempt in October 1973 when he was 16, hadn't he?
Oh, yes, but that was a mistake.
An overdose.
Yes, but as I say, it wasn't serious.
Well, it was serious enough for him to be taken to hospital to have his stomach pumped out, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Well, they had to do that. We didn't know how much he'd taken, you see. But it was only because he was cross with me about the school trip to Norway. Well, I knew it wouldn't be right for him to go, but he just did this little pill thing to upset me, you see. As I say, it wasn't serious.
Yes, but after this incident, Mrs. Merton, did the consultant psychiatrist at the hospital arrange for your son to have further psychiatric outpatient care?
Oh, yes. But he was a normal boy. He was just very highly strung.
Yes, well, you see, Mrs. Merton, you say he was a normal boy. He was just highly strung. But what we are trying to ascertain here today is whether he should have gone to this marathon group, whether he was the sort of person...
Well, no. No. Of course he wasn't. It was a criminal thing to do to him. I mean, he was always a very sensitive boy. Well, he was born with a little deformity of the hip, you know, and he was in plaster for 4 years, from 11 months. I took him everywhere with me in a little pushchair. He was always with me, and I never left him. Now, he was a good, happy, obedient little boy. Now, I never had any trouble with him until that summer when he was 16.
Yes. Now,
when he...
It was during that summer that he began his 7-month course of psychiatric outpatient care.
Yes, but
Yes.
it wasn't really the right thing for him.
No. Now, Mrs. Merton, Benjamin seemed quite happy and normal before you left for Wolverhampton at the beginning of that week in question.
Oh, yes, of course. I wouldn't have gone otherwise. Well, of course, it was an emergency, my sister being
Yes.
taken so ill, but I'd never left him before. But he was leading a quiet, regular life, doing well at his job at the town hall and getting on with little jobs about the house. I hadn't a worry in the world about him.
But when you came back, you found him in an excited and incoherent state, laughing one minute and crying the next.
Yes.
And it was later that same evening that he committed suicide.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Merton.
Mrs. Merton, when you say that you never left your son, you surely don't mean that you weren't ever separated from each other.
Never for a day.
But he didn't stay with friends or go on holiday with his contemporaries?
No, we always went on holiday together. To Cornwall. He didn't like sleeping away from home. Oh, when I say never, there were the 2 times when he was in hospital. When he was a baby with his hip, and then the other, at the time of the pill affair.
Yes, now, that affair. I think you said that during that summer when Benjamin was 16, he became difficult. Yes. Can you tell us in what way, please?
Well, he wouldn't tell me what he was thinking, for one thing. He'd always told me everything before, and he'd go out, not tell me where he was. And wanting to be by himself too much. Hours sitting in his room and reading and listening to gramophone records. And funny little fits of temper. If I criticised him about the least thing, he'd flare up. Oh, he was a changed boy that summer.
Well, none of that sounds very unusual for a growing adolescent.
Oh, it was unusual for Bibby.
Bibby?
Oh, that was my name for him, my lord. I always called him that.
I see, yes.
And I gather, Mrs. Merton, that you were very opposed to any psychiatric treatment for him.
Well, yes. It wasn't necessary. I told him it was silly to go on with it. It was upsetting him so much, or giving him nightmares, for one thing. And I was right. He settled down into his old self the moment that outpatient business was over and done with.
His old self.
Mr. Honeycomb, I wonder, are we perhaps taking up too much time on past history?
Well, I intend now to deal with the events of the night of April the 28th, my lord. However, it is essential, from my point of view, that the jury get a clear picture of Benjamin Merton's childhood development. It is, of course, part of my case that the repressive and destructive relationship he had with his mother was a far more vital factor in the suicide than the marathon encounter weekend. Mrs. Merton, did Benjamin tell you where he'd been before coming home that night?
Yes. To that Lucas's house. He went back there.
Yes, for advice.
Advice? From him? And he'd walked all the way home, 7 miles.
Which would explain the mud on his shoes, the untidiness, the perspiration that you described.
Yes, but he wasn't strong. He shouldn't have
Now,
walked
tell me, did he give you the impression that evening of being happy?
Happy? Oh, you might call it that. Well, that wasn't real happiness, all jangled up and overexcited, beside himself.
Yes, excited, enthusiastic, a stranger to you. Just as the 16-year-old reaching out for a little privacy, trying to grow up, was, as you said, a changed boy. Now, did he tell you that Michael Lucas had that evening arranged private psychotherapy for Benjamin to begin the next week?
Oh, yes, that was all part of it, as if he hadn't done enough to my
Yes,
boy.
and did you forbid it, Mrs. Merton, as you always had done before?
Yeah, well, he wouldn't listen to me.
So you took him by the shoulders and you shook him. You shouted at him, you said. What was it that you shouted, Mrs. Merton?
I can't remember. No, I don't remember. I was just trying to make him pull himself together.
Joan Carmichael, a friend of your son's, will testify that she had a telephone call from Benjamin at 9:40 after he left your house.
That girl was no friend to
He was
Bibby.
calling from a public call box and he was in a very distressed state of mind. He was crying. He said that you had just told him, Mrs. Merton, that his father had died in a mental hospital when Benjamin was 2 years old.
It was none of her business. It had nothing to do with
But
her.
everything to do with your son. That was what you shouted at him, wasn't it, Mrs. Merton? That secret that you'd kept from him all his life. Wasn't that why he stared at you in shock and terror? Wasn't that why he ran out of the house that night to his desperate, tragic death? Wasn't it, Mrs. Merton?
You told your son about his father that night because you were frightened for him.
Yes, I was terrified.
Yes, because he was behaving in a terrifying manner.
Yes, he was like a wild thing. At any minute you'd think he'd fly apart.
Yes. Now, that tallies with the statement of Miss Nicholson, who was another member of the Marathon Encounter group. She said that when Benjamin was going through this breakdown in the group, he swung between laughter and weeping and moved about erratically and poured out torrents of senseless and incoherent words.
Yes, that's just the way he was.
Yes. Now, was he like this before you told him about his father?
Oh, yes, the same. Exactly the same.
Thank you, Mrs. Merton. I have no further questions, my lord.
Very well. You may leave the witness box, Mrs. Merton.
I call Professor Samuel Bonner. You are Samuel Bonner, Professor of Psychiatry at the St. Tobias Teaching Hospital of the University of London.
I am.
And you are a Doctor of Medicine, Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, Fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and you hold the Diploma of Psychological Medicine.
Yes.
Did you treat Benjamin Merton when he was a patient in the Fulchester Hospital after a suicide attempt in October 1973?
Yes, I was consultant psychiatrist at that hospital until 1974. I handled the case. I was heading a research survey on disturbed adolescents at the time.
Yes. Could you describe his condition for us?
It was a temporary breakdown situation. Clinically, he showed such features as withdrawal from external reality, rigidity of posture and movement, and thought disorder. He remained mute and refused food until we arranged for his mother to come and feed him. He was only in hospital for 10 days. His mother was opposed to a longer stay.
But you did arrange further treatment for the boy after he left the hospital?
What I could, yes. Unfortunately, there never seemed to be adequate funds or facilities for the work that needs to be done in this field. Manifested suicidal impulses are much more common in adolescence than people seem to realize. Now, this boy attended hospital once a week for psychotherapy. It was more of a holding than a healing operation, and even this was terminated by his mother after 7 months.
Yes. During the treatment period, did a clearer picture of his mental state emerge?
The case notes indicate basic defects in achieving maturity of the personality, and there were clear signs of inadequate ego development. Now, I think that the crucial period which precipitated the suicide act could have been adequately worked through in sustained psychotherapy.
And without this working through...
There was still a reasonable possibility of adjustment, providing that the pressures he encountered didn't put too great a stress on his emotional capabilities.
And if the stresses did prove too great...
Now, under extreme pressure, there is a risk, in a case like this one, of psychotic breakdown.
Yes. Now, Professor Bonner, is it your opinion that this intensive marathon experience that Benjamin Merton was exposed to represents just such an extreme pressure?
Yes, that is my opinion.
And that because of that, he in fact did suffer a psychotic breakdown?
Yeah, from the information I have heard, I would say so, definitely.
Yes.
But you haven't heard the evidence of Miss Nicholson and Mrs. Merton.
I'm afraid I couldn't get here in time, my lord, but I have, of course, seen statements from them about Benjamin's behaviour.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, Professor Bonner, on April 22nd, did the accused Michael Lucas telephone you?
Yes, he told me that he was screening applicants for a marathon encounter group. Benjamin Merton had applied. Mr. Lucas had previously posted me the boy's written approval of such an inquiry. I gave him details of the history and symptoms we had encountered and told him that, in my opinion, Benjamin was quite unsuited for this sort of activity.
Yes. Can you tell us in a little more detail the sort of bad reaction this sort of activity might provoke?
Possible severe anxiety and depressive withdrawal, or a splitting off from reality into disruptive and aggressive behavior, perhaps self-inflicted physical injury and acute emotional distress. Now, from my own experience, I am convinced that the sort of stimulation produced in these amateur groups can be very hazardous for an unstable personality.
Yes, and if this sort of behavior did result, what procedure should the group leader take?
Any responsible practitioner would immediately remove the person from the group, and if the symptoms were severe, obtain emergency treatment, tranquilizer, sedation, even hospitalization.
Yes,
Professor
I
Bonner,
see.
when you say that from your experience the stimulation produced by some of these groups can be very hazardous, do you refer to specific cases?
Indeed I do, my lord. In the past 8 years, I have treated 3 patients who suffered psychotic or near-psychotic reactions to encounter group exposure. Now, an enormous amount of excellent group therapy is undertaken in institutions. But anybody can set up as an encounter group leader and anywhere. One of the patients I referred to had participated in a group led by a man who had discontinued his own psychiatric treatment.
I see, and I think you're saying that it could be foreseen that a marathon experience might provoke bad reactions in Benjamin Merton. Now, would these bad reactions include suicide?
Indeed, yes, my lord. A person in that state would be quite unpredictable and might well be deprived of all normal responses and instincts of self-preservation.
And would you expect a man with Mr. Lucas's experience and qualifications to be aware of these dangers?
I would, my lord.
Well, let's get on.
Now, Professor Bonner, in your expert opinion, was Michael Lucas wrong in accepting Benjamin Merton for this group?
More than that, I regard it as absolutely irresponsible.
Yes. And what about the accused's behavior and apparent inertia after this boy had begun to show symptoms of a psychotic breakdown?
I would say that his behavior was negligent in the extreme.
Yes, and could this negligence have been the direct cause of the subsequent suicide?
That seems to me very probable, yes. It would not have occurred if Benjamin had been properly looked after.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Professor Bonner, were you ever informed by Mrs. Merton that her husband had died in a mental hospital?
No, I was not.
And nor was her son, until she imparted this fact to him very suddenly on the night of his death. Now, could not this have caused an emotional shock precipitating the suicidal act?
Very difficult to say. It would depend entirely on what state he was in at that point.
Professor, is your accusation of extreme negligence against my client based on your assumption that Benjamin Merton was a latent psychotic?
Not an assumption, a possibility.
And you told Mr. Lucas this in your telephone conversation of April the 22nd?
Yes, as I've said, I gave him details of the case.
Well, my client's recollection, Professor, is that the telephone conversation was mainly taken up with your own very negative opinions about encounter work generally.
As I've already said, my clinical experience of the results of such work was far from positive.
Yes, you mentioned 3 cases over a period of 8 years. Now, are you aware that Mr. Lucas has worked in the last 6 years with over 700 people in groups, none of whom suffered injurious results?
Even a single case of gross disturbance is serious. And I would think that the suicide of an 18-year-old boy must be classed as an injurious result.
Well, you see, one of the issues in this trial is whether or not it was the experience in the group that caused the suicide. Now, to return to this telephone conversation, Michael Lucas will testify that at no time did you use the term latent psychotic, nor did you give him full details of symptoms and treatment.
I told him that Merton was an attempted suicide case, that he had been in my care for some months, and that I did not advise encounter work for him.
Now, you said earlier, Professor Bonner, manifested suicidal impulses in adolescence are not uncommon. Right. Now, would you maintain that every case of this kind indicates latent psychosis?
No, of course not. It's quite often a temporary emotional crisis.
Yes, exactly. And from what my client gathered, this might have been the case with Benjamin Merton.
Might be, yes. However, in this case, a psychotic episode did occur. My accusations of negligence referred to Lucas's behavior when it did.
Which brings us to one of the most crucial issues confronting us. Whether what happened to Benjamin Merton that weekend was, in fact, a breakdown.
I was not aware that that point was ever in question.
No, well, that's not surprising, you see, because you have been asked to testify as an expert witness in a prosecution case which pivots upon this being taken as fact. Now, what sources of information had you, Professor, concerning this alleged breakdown?
A detailed report made by a Miss Nicholson who was present in the group. Her description was substantiated by another report by Mrs. Merton, the boy's mother. They describe his behavior as characterized by disorientation, infantile regression, thought disorder, and hallucination.
Now, the hallucinations would be a very significant feature.
Oh, very much so. Delusions and hallucinations are commonly observed in psychosis.
And both reports describe this?
Well, Miss Nicholson gave a clear account of hallucinatory behavior. She said that he was speaking and shouting, sometimes in what I take to be a hebephrenic or markedly childish manner, to a threatening figure whom he perceived as his mother.
Yes, right. Now, Professor Bonner, are you familiar with the work of Dr. Alexander Lowen, the American psychotherapist and director of the Institute for Bioenergetics in New York?
Yes, I have read his work.
Well, you would know then of his anger outward exercises, in which the subject is asked to pound a couch or a pillow whilst expressing undischarged feelings of rage and frustration. Well, it was this exercise that my client had asked Benjamin Merton to perform while imagining his mother. Now, could such actions be misinterpreted as hallucinatory behavior?
Perhaps, yes. But surely, as a participating member of the group, Miss Nicholson would be aware that this was an exercise.
Ah, yes, but you see, she has told us that she had withdrawn from the group and was sitting in the corner of the room reading a book. And she also admits that she left the house before the group was concluded, so she didn't see that the boy was carefully and affectionately calmed down by my client and that he slept for several hours thereafter.
I was not informed of this.
No, obviously not. Now, Professor Bonner, my client says that you did not give him full details of symptoms and treatment, and that in particular you did not mention the possibility of latent psychosis. He is also quite clear that what happened to Benjamin on the morning of Sunday, April the 27th, was not a psychotic breakdown, but was a containable and contained emotional disruption. Now, if he's right about both these things, can you really criticize his behavior?
Well, if those were the circumstances, then the accusation of negligence would not be justified. But surely all this is irrelevant. According to the boy's mother, on the following evening, Merton was still exhibiting markedly uncontrolled behavior, which is quite inconsistent with your client's claim that the psychotic episode was a contained emotional disruption.
Yes. Now, Professor Bonner, what was your professional assessment of the relationship between Mrs. Merton and her son?
Well, certainly it wasn't very satisfactory. She had fostered a dependency that was nearly a symbiosis, that is, a merging relationship, in which her son found difficulty in experiencing himself as an independent unit. Her resistance to his being regarded as in any way abnormal was huge.
Now, my client agreed with you, Professor, that the boy was very much in need of sustained psychotherapy, and he had arranged just this for Benjamin on the evening before Benjamin confronted his mother, in a state certainly far from passive. Now, in view of his mother's attitudes, she might tend to regard Benjamin's excitement and optimism as being signs of mental instability, might she not?
It is possible, yes. However, I must repeat, all the symptoms described to me tally with a clinical picture of a psychotic episode.
Yes. As described to you. Right. Thank you, Professor.
Professor Bonner, my learned friend has used the word if very extensively, but we mustn't lose sight of the facts. However correctly the accused behaved in telephoning you that night, he did not take your advice. Whatever the conjectured disposition of the witnesses to Benjamin Merton's behavior, the symptoms described to you led you to conclude psychosis, the result of which was suicide, a gross pathological act. Is all this correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Professor. Does your Lordship have any further questions?
Thank you, Professor.
That concludes the case for the prosecution, my lord.
You are Michael Patrick Lucas of 7 Fleet Terrace, London, Northwest 8?
Yes.
And is it correct that you hold a degree in psychology from the University of Manchester and completed a subsequent 2-year training at the Sullivan Psychiatric Hospital in Manchester to qualify as a clinical psychologist?
Yes.
Now, in March 1973, I believe you were invited to give a 6-week course of lectures and demonstrations in encounter work to the psychiatric staff of the Sullivan Hospital.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Lucas, do you believe that the experience that Benjamin Merton had in the marathon group at your house was what led him to commit suicide on the night of April the 28th?
No, I do not.
No.
He had a very powerful emotional experience, but a potentially very helpful one.
Yes. Can you describe to us, please, what did happen that weekend?
He was very quiet for the whole of the first session until the break for sleep on Saturday night.
Did he seem withdrawn or anxious?
No, he seemed very alert and attentive, very much there, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I got the feeling that he was sort of preparing himself. And then on the Sunday morning, he obviously felt enough trust in the group to open up in a very strong way.
Now, what was the sequence of events that morning?
Well, he started with a very aggressive verbal attack on Anne Nicholson. But I blame myself entirely about Anne. I thought wrongly that she realized that she'd been selected as a surrogate, and that when she got over the initial attack, she would be able to utilize the interaction. I had no idea she was going to leave the house.
Yeah, what do you mean by surrogate, Mr. Lucas?
Oh, well, Ben had obviously chosen her to represent his mother. That's why I asked him to speak to her and not about her. Then I gave him a scene to act out, playing both the parts of his mother and himself, but not using words, just sounds. He did this with terrific energy. It was actually very funny. He made everybody laugh, and he laughed himself, but then he started to cry.
And was that when Miss Nicholson started to intervene?
Yes, I explained to her that Benjamin must be allowed to go through all these feelings. He clearly wanted to go on.
Now, how could you tell that?
Well, he immediately asked me if he could work on a dream enactment.
What is a dream enactment, Mr. Lucas?
It's a technique for re-experiencing dreams in the present, my lord. Several people had done this the day before.
I see. Yes, go on, please.
He chose a recurring nightmare of his. He was in the desert at night, and a distant wheel was coming towards him faster and faster and getting bigger and bigger. He always woke up very frightened just as the wheel was going to run over him. We asked him if we could work on the dream.
Yes, what kind of work do you mean?
Well, I suggested that he finish the dream by getting up and knocking the wheel over. Well, this frightened him a lot at first. But then a member of the group said, could he be the wheel and try and push him over in a hand-to-hand pushing exercise? He did this very aggressively, and he did succeed in pushing him over. He was very elated by this. He went straight from this into the anger outward exercise that's already been mentioned.
That's the physical and vocal expression of anger whilst imagining his mother.
Yes, I realize that this technique might sound rather brutal, but it's not the actual parent that's being punished. It's the internalized and often distorted attitude towards the parent. I mean, Benjamin was discharging attitudes of rage towards his mother that he didn't even know he had. This brought about a huge release of tension. He was completely exhausted afterwards.
Now, Miss Nicholson described him at this point as being too far gone. She said he lay on the floor whimpering.
Well, yes, he did. But I think it was because he'd gone far enough, not too far. I helped him over to a couch and stayed with him until he fell asleep.
And did you speak to him the following day?
Yes, he phoned me about 10 o'clock from Joan Carmichael's flat. Well, she'd put him up because I didn't think it was a good idea for him to be on his own. We made an appointment to meet on Monday at 6.
And did he keep that appointment?
Yes.
Yes. What took place at that interview?
Well, he had been very shaken up by his experience on Sunday. We talked for a long time, and I think I managed to reassure him. I said I thought he definitely should have private therapy, and I told him about a psychiatrist friend of mine who does a lot of work with young people.
And he agreed to your proposal?
Oh, yes, he was very happy and excited about the thought.
Now, when he left your house that evening, did you think that he was in what has been described as a perilous state?
Well, no, I did not. I wouldn't have let him leave otherwise. He was very tired, but he seemed to me quite calm.
Yes. Right, thank you, Mr. Lucas.
Mr. Lucas, did you never consider that the sort of activity that you've been describing might entail any risk for a boy like Benjamin Merton?
Well, it did, of course. Everyone in a marathon takes a risk. I mean, that's the
You see,
nature.
Mr. Lucas, to an outsider, it might seem possible that this group was using Benjamin's needs for their own vicarious gratification.
Oh, I don't think you could possibly think that if you'd been there.
Miss Nicholson was there, and she thought so.
Well, Anne didn't really understand what was happening. Her experience in encounter work had been with a very verbal, quite intellectual group. She'd never seen this sort of work before, and I should have made sure she realized what was going on.
Everyone else present was conversant with the techniques.
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, everybody there had participated in this sort of exercise before. Except Benjamin, of course.
Who was dead. Miss Nicholson left the group frightened and disillusioned. The two non-cult members, both casualties.
That boy had been encasing himself for years in armor. That weekend, he was actually able to make some cracks in the armor for the first time in his life. I know from my talk with him that this gave him a sense of real hope and confidence. Therefore, I repudiate the word casualty.
Well, I repeat, Mr. Lucas, that less than 36 hours after making this crack in the armor, as you put it, Benjamin Merton was dead. Now, Professor Bonner has explicitly stated that this group marathon encounter represented precisely the sort of extreme pressure that this boy could not tolerate. But you wouldn't take his advice.
I didn't ask him for advice, I asked him for information.
Which you say you didn't receive?
Which I didn't receive.
Well, did you hear him say anything in court today to make you consider the possibility that you were wrong in accepting Benjamin Merton for the marathon?
No, not about that.
Were wrong then in not removing him from it once he began to show signs of a psychotic breakdown?
Well, I think it's been said enough times by now that I did not think it was a breakdown. I selected Ben for that group because I judged it would be a useful experience for him, and I believe it was. It would not have been useful if I had taken him away just as he was beginning to have the experience. It is part of my profession to make these judgments, and I will go on. It was after hearing Professor Bonnard's observation about Mrs. Merton and hearing her testimony that I do think that I was wrong in letting Ben go home on his own that Monday evening.
Well, do I understand that you are blaming Mrs.
No,
Merton
please,
for this?
I don't think blame is a word I'd use at all. Not about me or Mrs. Merton or Professor Bonner or fate come to that. Ben didn't tell me that his mother didn't know about the marathon. It was sprung on her and she obviously couldn't cope with it.
Yes, and you could say, Mr. Lucas, the boy couldn't cope with her not coping because of these very cracks in his armor.
Well, because you could say somebody had mentioned the marathon to him, because he had to leave school and work at the town hall, because he took an overdose when he was 16, because he was encased in plaster when he was a baby. I mean, you could go back and back and back and still never find the exact place to put the blame.
Yes, but Mr. Lucas, in this case, we're all here because we're required to decide whether any blame in the sense of gross negligence attaches to you. We're not here for philosophical discussion.
I'm sorry, my lord.
Oh, that's all right.
Now, one last point, Mr. Lucas. This psychiatrist friend you were arranging for Benjamin to see, did you contact him?
No, I was going to see him on my return to London the next day.
Oh, I see. So we only have your word for it that Benjamin Merton, as part of his newfound equilibrium, had agreed to undergo psychiatry. No further questions.
Mr. Lucas, you told us that Benjamin had said to you in that first interview that he felt that nothing mattered and that life was not worth living. Now, do you think that he was expressing suicidal tendencies?
No, I thought he was expressing loneliness. Look, the people who want to work with me and who I want to work with aren't suicidal psychotics. They come to the group because they are feeling alienated and lost. They want to get back some of their real feelings, the feelings we see in children of joy and zest and proper curiosity and hope about life. We're all so busy trying to keep up to what society calls success that we simply forget just to celebrate ourselves. Now, in the kind of work that I do, we all meet to try and get rid of all that for just a little while. We try to feel our feelings for ourselves and for each other. I'm sorry for having made a speech, but I honestly believe that what happened to Ben that day was a celebration.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
I think I was the only person he really talked to at the office. Terribly quiet, shy person. He's just the same age, he was the same age as my younger brother. I sort of adopted Ben.
You saw a good deal of each other, Miss Carmichael?
Well, we used to eat our sandwiches together at lunchtime, and sometimes we go to a film on Saturday afternoons. His mother worked on Saturdays. She,
You mean she didn't know about your going to the cinema together?
Well, I don't think she liked me, you see. Really?
Why not?
Well, the thing was, I don't think she... Well, anyway, I had these 2 tickets for the theatre this time, and I asked Ben if he wanted to go, and he said yes, so I came by for him. Well, I've got this old banger of a car my father gave me. Terribly sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
That's quite all right, Miss Carmichael. You take your time.
Well, she wouldn't give him a key. I mean, he didn't have one of his own. Well, I was a bit staggered by that, you know. But anyway, I honestly thought she was joking, so I said something, well, sort of jolly and supposedly witty, and she got quite offended, you know, grim. And kept going on about how it wouldn't be convenient for her to wait up and how she couldn't sleep if the chain wasn't up on the front door. It was all so weird. Ben didn't say anything much. I got quite embarrassed. So in the end, we didn't go.
Yes. Now tell me, did he talk to you very much about his mother?
Well, it was a bit difficult. Neither of us said anything about that night. And anyway, I always do most of the talking, and it didn't seem right about, well, you know, other people's mothers. But then once, well, he did talk about her and about how depressed he got. So I told him about this group that I go to of Michael's.
You mean the marathon group?
No, it's a group that meets once a fortnight in London at Michael's place in St John's Wood. But I've been to 2 marathons down at Michael's cottage.
Now, Miss Carmichael, do you still attend Mr. Lucas's group in London?
Oh, yes. Oh, because of what happened to Ben, you mean? Oh, no. And anybody who knows Michael would never... And anyway, I told the solicitor about Ben phoning me that night.
Yes. We'll come to the telephone call in a moment, Miss Carmichael. Just for now, would you tell us how Benjamin reacted to your conversation about the group work?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I'm not very good at this. Well, about a month later, he suddenly said that he'd like to do it too. Be in the group, I mean.
I see. Now, on the Sunday morning of the marathon weekend...
When Ben freaked, you mean?
Freaked, Miss Carmichael?
Oh, I think that's what young...
Yes, I know all about freaked.
I beg your pardon.
I want to know what Miss Carmichael means by freaked. Do you mean that morning Benjamin Merton had a breakdown, became out of control?
Oh, no, you couldn't say that, my lord. Ben was fine afterwards. You could say it was like a breakdown, but not a real one.
I see.
And as you say, he was fine afterwards. Now, I understand that you put him up at your flat. What sort of state was he in on Monday morning?
Well, he was terribly tired. He told me he hadn't slept much, but he was still very, you know, elated. So I said he could stay at the flat and sleep all day, and I'd say at the office he was ill.
Yes. And that evening?
He phoned.
Mm-hmm. Can you remember what he said?
Well, I could hardly understand him. He was so upset. He was crying. He said his mother had just told him that his father had been mad when he died. He said he didn't know what to do. He kept asking me if I thought he was mad too. But he couldn't really listen to what I had to say, so I told him to wait by the phone box and I'd come for him. He promised he'd wait. I made him promise. And I drove straight over. And he was gone.
Thank you, Miss Carmichael.
Miss Carmichael, Benjamin asked you if you thought he was mad, and yet you say the breakdown he had the previous day was not a real one.
Yeah.
Now, you describe him as a very quiet person. Was he very different on that Sunday evening?
Oh, yes, he was, before he phoned Michael that night. But then he was laughing and talking. He was a different person, he really was.
Yes, and on the Monday morning you say he hadn't slept. Elated, you said. Now, no doubt he was also somewhat overstrained and erratic by then.
Yes, he was. I was a bit worried about him. But then I knew he was going to sleep all day.
Yes, but you don't know if that's what he did, Miss Carmichael. I mean, he may not have slept at all, in which case he would hardly have had any sleep for nearly 4 days. I mean, for all anyone knows, he went through the day accelerating in his agitation, getting more and more erratic.
But he saw Michael that evening, and he told me that Ben was really happy then and calm. He said that it was quite okay, that he was fine.
Yes. You see, Miss Carmichael, Mr. Lucas is the accused in this case, and it's only natural he'd wish to give us the impression he had a calming effect on Benjamin Merton that night.
But I'd seen him having a calming effect on him the day before when Ben was in a terrible state.
A terrible state? Yes. Now, Miss Carmichael, you said you attended 2 marathons before this one. Had you ever seen anyone behave with such violence then?
Well, no, but Michael, we were all asking him to do quite violent things all at the same time. It was sort of concentrated that time.
Yes, and as you say, terrible and violent.
Yes, I have no re-examination.
You may leave the witness box, Miss Carmichael.
I call Dr. Harriet McCausland. You are Harriet Jane McCausland, Doctor of Medicine and Psychiatrist?
Yes, I am.
And you're on the teaching staff of the Washington School of Psychiatry and Deputy Director of the Newman Adolescent Residential Unit attached to the National Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland?
Yes.
Dr. McCausland, have you come over to England just for this trial?
Yes, I have, my lord.
Oh, yes.
How long have you known Michael Lucas?
Since 1968.
And you sponsored him in 1969 for a special grant to do a training course at the Washington School of Psychiatry?
Yes, he did the course at our Group Relations Center.
Yes, and in the autumn of 1970, you asked Mr. Lucas to assist in a 2-month series of groups with the residents of the Newman Adolescent Unit?
Yes.
Now, Dr. McCausland, what is your professional opinion of Michael Lucas's work?
Well, I think he's extremely talented and highly skilled. The work I saw him do at the Newman was excellent.
And speaking as a character witness?
Well, I could go on for a long time. He's very intelligent, reliable, sensitive, has an excellent sense of humor. You can see I think very highly of him. Why else would I have come all this distance to say so if I didn't?
Have you seen very much of him since 1969?
Yes, I've been to London, I'd say, about 6 times in the last 5 years. Michael and I always meet when I'm here, even if it's only just for a flying visit.
And you know, of course, that Mr. Lucas is on trial for manslaughter.
Yes, I do.
And you know of the circumstances.
Yes, I've been here throughout the whole trial.
Now, Mr. Lucas says that Professor Bonner did not tell him all the professor claims, but let us assume for the moment that he did. Now, is it your opinion that Mr. Lucas should have excluded Benjamin Merton from the Marathon Encounter Group on the basis of the psychiatric history of the boy which Professor Bonner described in his evidence?
No, it isn't. And I'm very conservative about participant selection. Except for hospital work, I think extreme care should be exercised. And I would definitely advocate the exclusion of certain diagnostic categories, which would include psychotics. But from what I understand, this boy has never been labeled clinically psychotic.
And would you concur with the opinion that at the onset of Benjamin Merton's intensive experience, he should have been removed from the group?
No, I wouldn't. A psychotic-like disruption has to be contained by an extremely skilled leader to be beneficial. And in this case, I'd certainly say it was.
You say psychotic-like.
Yes, my lord. It's hard to draw lines. A well person in a very powerful emotional state can behave in ways that in a sick person would be psychotic symptoms. As a matter of fact, when we are describing schizophrenia, we often use terms that we'd use in describing, well, the normal behavior of babies and little children.
Yes, you understand, Dr. McCausland, in this case it is an important issue as to whether or not Benjamin Merton was a latent psychotic.
Yes, my lord. In my view, it's quite impossible to label the episode as described by the witnesses here as definitely psychotic.
Yes, thank you, Dr. McCausland. Yes, Mr. Honeycutt.
Now, this series of groups that Mr. Lucas did for you in the Newman Adolescent Unit, Dr. McCausland, did that involve young people who were very disturbed?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We run the full gamut at the unit. I'd say usually at least 1/3 of the residents have been diagnosed as schizophrenic.
So in that work, he would have had to deal with some of these psychotic-like disruptions that you mentioned?
Indeed, he did. The group work we do there can always be counted on to produce some very formidable reactions.
And did it seem to you that Mr. Lucas was able to handle these formidable reactions?
Yes. His instincts always struck me as being remarkably accurate.
Good. Thank you, Dr. McCausland.
Dr. McCausland, it was 6 years ago that you worked with the accused at the Newman Residential Unit. Have you worked together since?
No, I wish we had.
So, in fact, your professional assessment of him is not based on a very recent experience.
That's true. But I have read 3 published papers of his, all of which impressed me very much.
Yes, but at the moment I'm concerned with the practical side of the accused's work, which, as you say, you haven't actual experience for over 6 years.
I have a very high professional regard for a great many people in the therapeutic field whose work I have never seen at all.
But who are not on trial for manslaughter. You see, Dr. Nicholson, it strikes me that the profession of group leader is not easily definable. It's not governed by explicit qualifications. Its methods are constantly changing. There's much innovation. Would you agree with that?
Yes, in many ways, of course, it's still an experimental field.
Yes, and by definition, the experiment is based on trial and error. Now, we are here today to consider whether or not an error has been made. The young man is dead. Now, you have testified that the accused showed the correct responses in dealing with a psychotic-like breakdown.
Yes, I did.
But that was in a clinical setting, wasn't it? The Newman Residential Unit, as we've heard, is attached to a hospital. Now, the staff there are no doubt all trained psychiatric workers.
Yes, they are.
Consequently, the situation carries built-in safeguards. Skilled clinicians are on hand to intervene if the situation may seem potentially dangerous. I take it there are times when intervention is necessary.
Yes, there are sometimes, especially if there seems to be the risk of physical damage. But the Newman is a community of very disturbed young people. They are acknowledged patients who've had a severe enough history to require a physical and a clinical setting. It's an entirely different thing than a group of people who've volunteered for a private marathon.
Yes, well, we've heard that 2 years ago, in a clinical setting, this boy, it was a suspected pre-psychotic with schizoid tendencies. We know that on April 27th, in a country cottage, where there was no skilled psychiatric staff to intervene, he in fact experienced a great disruption. And the following evening, he suffered the altogether unequivocal physical damage of death.
But are you going to ask any more questions, Mr. Parsons?
No, no further questions, my lord.
I assume, Dr. McCausland, that in the frequent meetings you've had over the years with Michael Lucas, you do talk about work together.
Oh, incessantly, I'm afraid.
So you would be aware if he had radically changed his methods, taken up any alarming innovatory techniques.
I certainly would.
Now, Dr. McCausland, can you tell us if there is known to be a high incidence of gross disturbance occurring as a result of encounter group participation?
Well, that's not easy to calculate. Not nearly enough research has been done on this. But there have been a number of very good follow-up surveys. I've studied a good many of them, and in these, the incidence of damage seems to work out somewhere between 0.6% and 2%.
Yes, quite a minor incidence, in fact. Now, Dr. McCausland, is it your view that Michael Lucas's conduct in relation to Benjamin Merton was irresponsible or negligent?
No, it is not my view. However you look at the case, he didn't do anything wrong.
Thank you, Dr. McCausland.
Thank you, Dr. McCausland.
That concludes the case for the defense, my lord.
Mr. Parsons, before you start, members of the jury, in the normal event, we would start the closing speeches by learned counsel straight away. But I want a little time to consider the evidence we have heard. So we will adjourn for 15 minutes.
My lord.
Yes, Mr. Parsons.
My lord, if I am correct in my assumption as to what is in your lordship's mind, I would like the opportunity of addressing you.
Very well. The jury may leave the court.
My lord, am I right in assuming you are considering directing a verdict of not guilty?
Yes, Mr. Parsons, I've been troubled by this case all along. As you know, a charge of manslaughter in a case like this is a very novel one, and then there is the contradictory evidence of Professor Bonner and Dr. McCausland. How can I ask a jury to reconcile the conflict between two diametrically opposed experts of apparently equal standing and reputation?
My lord, it's often been done in motoring cases, for example, where mechanical defect is run as a defence.
Well, but expert evidence about motor cars is in rather a different category from expert evidence about people's minds, don't you think?
Well, perhaps so, my lord, but they are both realms of expertise that may be equally alien to a jury.
In addition to this problem, the link between the boy's suicide and his experience at the marathon encounter group is virtually broken by the fact that the mother on the Monday evening threw into the scales of his barely balanced mind the information that his father had died in a mental hospital.
My lord, it is the prosecution case that the boy had lost any balance of his mind before going home to his mother.
Yes, but you have to rely on the mother's evidence for this, and her ideas of when her son was or was not behaving in a normal fashion must be seen against her relationship with the boy, which has been shown as destructive, possessive, not normal, in fact.
My lord, if I may say so, it is entirely a matter for the jury to decide what credibility to give to the mother's evidence.
Oh, at this stage, it's partly a matter for me.
My lord, I cannot agree. My lord, this prosecution was not lightly brought.
I'm sure it wasn't, Mr.
It was
Parsons.
brought, my lord, because a suicide has occurred as a result of a man unqualified as a psychiatrist, trying to satisfy his own ego as a self-appointed healer at the expense of an emotionally disturbed and vulnerable 18-year-old boy. The accused's cavalier refusal to take Professor Bonner's advice that this boy was unfit to take part in such games is evidence of negligence, as was his lack of correct professional behavior once the boy's breakdown had started. Now, surely, such extreme irresponsibility as this is verging on the criminal. Such practices as this must not go unchecked.
You're not addressing a jury now, Mr. Parsons.
Perhaps not, my lord. However, it is my submission that it is the jury's task to assess the mother's evidence and to make up their own minds as to the psychiatric evidence. I realize the point at which a judge should intervene is an imprecise one, is in a question of degree. But it is my submission, my lord, that this is not a case for such intervention.
Yes, well, I understand your point of view. Anything else you want to say?
No, thank you, my lord.
Mr. Honeycomb, do you want to say anything?
No, my lord, I don't think there's any need. Your lordship has made all the points rather better than I could, if I may say so.
Yes, well, in that case, we will adjourn until 10:30 tomorrow. I shall consider the matter overnight and give you my decision in the morning. All stand. Members of the jury, before we adjourned yesterday afternoon, I told you I wanted a little time to consider the evidence. I wanted to consider whether there was sufficiently cogent evidence against the accused for it to be necessary for you to have to deal with it. Well, I have come to the conclusion that there is insufficient evidence for a conviction. Accordingly, I direct you to return a verdict of not guilty. Will you act as foreman?
Yes. Will your foreman please stand? Have you reached a verdict on which you're all agreed, and is that a verdict of not guilty?
It is.
You are discharged and free to leave the court.
All stand.
You can join another jury and assess the facts when our cameras return to bring you a leading case in the Crown Court.